Bride left at the altar finds her missing groom years later. What she discovers shocks everyone. Emily woke up that morning with her heart racing, but it wasn't bad anxiety. It was the excitement of someone who was about to experience the day she had always dreamed of. The preparations for the wedding had been exhausting, but every detail had been planned with love and dedication. The white dress hanging in the closet seemed like a vision out of a fairy tale. Everything would be perfect, just as she and Nathan had always imagined. Nathan. The mere thought of his name made Emily smile. He was the embodiment of the man of her dreams, kind, funny, and passionate. In the 5 years they had been together, he had never let her doubt his love. Nathan made promises with a conviction that made her believe they were destined to be together forever. The first rays of sunlight came through the window, and Emily felt a wave of happiness at the thought that in a few hours she would be walking down the aisle to start her life with Nathan. Her excited friends arrived early to help her get ready. The room was filled with laughter and excited comments as Emily's hair was carefully styled and her flawless makeup highlighted her delicate features even more. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Nathan was surrounded by his own friends. He had spent the morning laughing and joking while putting on his suit. His best friend, Adam, couldn't contain his excitement at seeing him so happy. "Are you anxious?" Adam asked, adjusting Nathan's bow tie. "A little." Nathan smiled, but his eyes were shining. "It's more excitement than anything. I can't wait to see Emily at the altar." Adam patted his friend on the back. "Man, you were born for this. It's going to be the most incredible day of your life." Nathan looked radiant. He even made one last phone call to Emily, something that would normally be against the rules before the wedding. But he just couldn't help himself. "I just wanted to tell you that I love you," he said, while Emily, on the other end of the line, struggled to hold back tears of happiness. "I love you too," she replied. "I can't wait to see you at the altar." The hours passed quickly, and Emily was finally ready. When she looked in the mirror, she felt a mixture of pride and emotion. The dress with delicate lace details and a long train seemed to be made for her. Her friends sighed at the sight of her, and even her mother, who had always been demanding, seemed pleased. "You look stunning, dear," said her mother, holding her hands. "Nathan will cry when he sees you." But as Emily prepared to leave, something began to seem wrong. An unusual delay in phone calls and a subtle tension between the wedding organizers began to arouse her concern. At first she ignored it, believing it was just part of the nervousness of the day. But when Adam rushed into the room, his downcast expression sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "What's wrong?" she asked, holding the bouquet tightly. "I can't find Nathan," Adam replied, trying to stay calm. "He was here earlier, everything was fine, but he disappeared." Emily blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean he's gone?" "He was happy this morning. He called me. He was anxious." I know, said Adam, clearly as confused as she was. "He said he was going for a quick walk to ease his nerves, but that's been over an hour ago." The air in the room seemed to get heavy. Emily's friends exchanged worried glances, and her mother held her arm as if trying to stop her from collapsing right there. Emily shook her head, trying to ward off the worst-case scenario. He must have been late. Maybe he forgot the time. Nathan would never do that to me. He'll show up. But as the minutes turned into hours, reality began to set in. Messages and calls to Nathan went unanswered. Adam and other friends went out to look for him, but found no sign of him. The ceremony, scheduled for early afternoon, was postponed, while the guests murmured among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the delay. Emily, still in her wedding dress, sat on a chair in the preparation room, staring at the bouquet in her hands. Her breathing was rapid, and her heart felt like it wanted to burst out of her chest. The image of Nathan, with his confident smile and comforting words, repeated itself in her mind. He would never do that to her. He wasn't that kind of man. But the day turned into night, and Nathan never showed up. The guests began to leave, some murmuring words of consolation that sounded more like pity in disguise. Emily heard the whispers. Did he run away? I always thought he seemed too good to be true. Poor thing. Those words cut deeper than any knife. Emily didn't know whether to feel anger, sadness, or an immense emptiness that threatened to consume her. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she was paralyzed. Over the next few days, speculation took hold. Some rumors said that Nathan had run away because he didn't want to commit himself. Others claimed that he was secretly in another relationship. Adam, however, insisted that something was wrong. He was happy that day. I had never seen Nathan so excited. He wasn't the kind of person who would do that. Something happened, Adam said, trying to calm Emily down. But without concrete answers, uncertainty and humiliation became Emily's constant companions. She isolated herself, unable to deal with the pity of others or the pain of a love that had vanished like smoke in the wind. What had happened to Nathan? This question echoed in her mind, an endless mystery that turned the happiest day of her life into the most devastating. The days after Nathan's disappearance were a blur for Emily. She alternated between denial and hopelessness, refusing to believe that the man she loved had simply vanished without a trace. Every morning she woke up with the same question hammering at the back of her mind. Where is he? She began her search through the city with a vigor that came more from despair than hope. Carrying a recent photo of Nathan, she visited police stations, reporting him missing in a shaky but firm voice. He disappeared on our wedding day. He would never do that to me. Please, you have to look. The police officers listened to her without much patience. They didn't have much to offer apart from a formal report and generic words of encouragement. There was no sign of Nathan anywhere, no occurrences that might be of interest to her. There had even been an accident, but the person had been transferred to another city. Emily spent endless hours sitting in police stations, waiting for someone to bring news, but the calls she received were always disappointing. They then told her to go to the city hospital and see if they had any news. The police didn't seem to want to help. She didn't see any effort on their part, but a judgment, as if the groom had just given up on getting married and disappeared for a while. She just had to accept it. She then decided to turn her attention to the medical centers. She visited the only hospital in the area. There was already a change of duty, and she kept going into emergency rooms and asking for him at every reception desk. Sometimes she thought she was close to something, but the names in the records never matched Nathan. "Are you all right, dear?" asked a kind nurse after Emily had spent hours leafing through files in search of some clue. Emily just shook her head, her eyes red from crying. "I just want to know where he is." When hospitals and police stations didn't provide answers, Emily started visiting community centers, shelters, and even places Nathan would never have gone. The idea that he could be wandering somewhere, lost or injured, consumed her. Every corner seemed to bring a new piece of pain, as she looked into unfamiliar faces in the hope of finding the familiar eyes she loved so much. Nathan's family was also devastated. His elderly parents helped in any way they could, hiring private detectives and distributing posters around the city. Adam, her best friend, became Emily's greatest ally, accompanying her on many of these endless searches. "He was so happy that morning, Emily. I can't understand how it happened," Adam kept repeating day after day as they traveled around in search of answers. But as time went by, hope began to wear thin. The searches became less frequent, and the people around Emily began to say that maybe it was time to move on, and that he probably wouldn't come back until she accepted that he had given up. "Sometimes we don't have all the answers we want, Emily. Maybe you need to accept that," Adam once said with a tone of genuine sadness. But acceptance was impossible. How do you move on without knowing why? How do you rebuild your life when the person you loved has disappeared as if they had never existed? The years that followed were lonely and difficult. Emily tried to get her life back on track, but it was as if Nathan's disappearance had marked her irreversibly. Every attempt to smile seemed forced, every moment of joy fleeting, overshadowed by the constant shadow of what if. Eventually, Emily realized that she had to find a way to survive, even if she wasn't fully happy. She started working as a decorator for small events, something she had always loved, even before Nathan disappeared. Her natural skills and good taste soon attracted attention, and her clientele began to grow. In time, Emily managed to open her own decorating company. It was small, but she was proud of it. The work helped keep her busy and gave her a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt for a long time. But despite her professional success, the emotional scars remained. Emily had become a reserved woman, keeping her feelings to herself and keeping people at a distance. There were attempts at new relationships, but none went beyond a few dates. "You still think about him, don't you?" a friend once asked, while trying to convince her to give a potential suitor a chance. "He's a part of me that never goes away," Emily replied with a sad smile. and I don't know if I can give that part to anyone else. The nights were the hardest. Sometimes she dreamt of Nathan, and in those dreams he was always smiling, reaching out to her. But before she could reach him, he would disappear as he always did. Emily didn't know if she would ever be able to completely get over what had happened, but somehow she had found a fragile balance. Her company was growing slowly, and the compliments from her clients were a source of genuine joy. She had learned to live with Nathan's absence, even if she had never learned to accept it. As time passed, Emily realized that life went on, even if imperfectly. She became a strong and resilient woman, but behind her strength lay a silent pain that no one could see. Emily had no idea how that job would change her life. When she received an invitation to decorate an end-of-year event at a hospital in a neighboring town, she didn't think twice about accepting. The contract was promising and could open doors to expand her company. What's more, she felt comfortable focusing exclusively on her professional life. It gave her purpose and, more importantly, helped her bury the past. The drive to the city was uneventful, but as Emily approached the site, she felt a strange unease. It was as if something in the dense atmosphere of the metropolis was trying to warn her that this job would be different from all the others. However, she ignored the feeling and parked the car in front of the hospital. The building was imposing, with large glass windows that reflected the sunlight. Emily took a deep breath, adjusting her coat around her body to protect herself from the cold wind. She entered the lobby and was greeted by a friendly employee who led her to the venue. As they walked through the corridors, Emily looked closely at the details of the hospital structure. She was already beginning to imagine how she could transform the clinical space into something welcoming and magical for the event. That was what she did best: transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. The employee explained that the hospital organized the event every year for patients and staff, trying to bring a little joy to those going through difficult times. Emily felt her heart tighten at the thought of the stories of struggle and overcoming that probably permeated the place. "Here is the main wing where the event will take place," said the employee, indicating a large hall with large windows and white walls. Emily thanked her and started taking measurements, jotting down ideas in her notebook. She was completely immersed in her work when something caught her eye. A distant, almost imperceptible sound echoed down the corridor. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just the sound of wheels sliding smoothly across the floor, but something about the sound seemed strange. She raised her head, her eyes instinctively following the direction of the sound. The sight she found made her heart stop for an instant. There he was, Nathan. He was in a wheelchair, pushed by a caregiver who talked to him calmly. His appearance was unrecognizable, and Emily had to blink several times to make sure she wasn't imagining things. The man in front of her was visibly frail. His hair, once full of life, was thinning and graying. His face, which she knew so well, was marked by lines of suffering. And his eyes, those eyes that had once shone with such passion, now seemed lost, empty. Emily froze. Her mind was screaming with questions she couldn't articulate. How had he ended up there? What had happened to him over the last few years? Why had he never tried to get in touch? She took a step back, almost stumbling, as the shock took her completely. The notebook she was holding slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dry sound, but Emily didn't pick it up. She couldn't take her eyes off Nathan. He was there, so close and yet so far away. He looked like a shadow of the man she had loved. An indescribable pain began to form in her chest, as if all the repressed emotions of the last few years were coming to the surface at once. The caregiver stopped Nathan's chair near a window, adjusting it to make him comfortable. Nathan said nothing, just stared out at the world that seemed so far away from him. Emily, hidden behind a column, continued to watch, unable to move or look away. Her heart was in tatters. She wanted to run to him, demand answers, ask why he had left her, but at the same time something stopped her. She didn't know if it was fear, anger, or a mixture of the two. All she knew was that the man she was seeing was not the same one who had disappeared on their wedding day. Tears began to stream down Emily's face. She thought she had overcome the worst, that time had healed the wounds left by Nathan's disappearance, but at that moment she realized that the pain was still there, buried, but not forgotten. The caregiver said something to Nathan before pushing the chair away from the window and leading him back down the corridor. Emily stayed where she was, without the strength to move as he disappeared from sight. Her mind was in chaos. She tried to convince herself that it wasn't real, that it was an absurd coincidence or even an illusion caused by tiredness, but deep down she knew it was true. Nathan was alive, and he was there, in the same hospital where she had been hired to work. When she was finally able to move, Emily picked up the fallen notebook with trembling hands. What was she supposed to do now? Confront him? Ignore him? She had no answers, only one certainty. The encounter she had never imagined she would have was about to change everything. Emily remained motionless for long minutes after seeing Nathan, or the man she believed to be him, disappear down the corridor. Her breathing was ragged, and her heart felt like it wanted to burst out of her chest. The scene had been so surreal that she wondered if it was a figment of her imagination. But it wasn't. She knew it. Those eyes, even empty and lost, were unmistakable. When she finally found the strength to move, Emily decided that she needed to be sure. That doubt was eating her up inside. With hesitant steps, she walked down the corridor in the opposite direction, trying to regain control of her emotions. That's when she heard a familiar voice echoing through the silent space. "John, I'm going to get your medicine. Stay here by the window, okay?" Emily stopped abruptly, her whole body freezing. The nurse pushing Nathan's chair now spoke to him as if his name were John. For a moment she thought she had heard wrong. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was just an absurd coincidence. But her instinct told her otherwise. She took a few cautious steps, her heart racing with every movement. She peeked around the corner of the corridor and saw Nathan, or John as the nurse called him, still sitting in his wheelchair staring at the garden outside. He seemed oblivious to the world around him, as if trapped in deep thoughts or an inescapable emptiness. Emily knew she needed to confront him, but something inside her hesitated. What if he had really changed his name to escape his past? What if he had chosen this new life, leaving behind everything they shared? Doubt consumed her, but the need for answers was even greater. As the nurse began to walk away, Emily hurried her steps, stopping beside him before he had completely moved on. "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. The man turned to her with a gentle smile. "Of course, what can I do for you?" Emily looked at him, not knowing how to begin. Finally, she pointed discreetly at Nathan. "That man, you call him John. Why?" The nurse frowned for a moment, clearly surprised by the question. "Do you know him?" Emily hesitated before answering. I don't know, but he looks like someone I used to know. Someone who disappeared a long time ago." The nurse sighed, as if he was about to tell her something he had repeated many times before. He motioned for Emily to accompany him to a small room nearby, where they could talk without interruption. "I'm going to tell you what we know about John," he began, his voice deep but gentle. "He arrived here a few years ago, transferred from a smaller hospital in a distant city. He was brought in by paramedics after a serious car accident. When he arrived, he was in critical condition, with no documents, nothing that could identify him." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet as she listened to every word. He had spent months in a coma, struggling to survive. When he finally woke up, he remembered nothing. Not his name, not his family, not where he came from. "We tried everything, photos, ads. We even ran the license plates of the car from the accident. But we couldn't find anything about who he was or where he came from." The nurse paused, looking at Emily curiously. "With no name to go by, we started calling him John. That's what we managed to do. He's lived here ever since, in the rehabilitation ward." Emily felt the air go out of her. Her hands began to shake and her vision blurred. She didn't know if what she was feeling was shock, pain, or relief at finally having an answer, however incomplete. "Are you all right?" asked the nurse, concerned. But Emily wasn't all right. His words swirled around her mind like a storm. Nathan was alive, but he wasn't Nathan anymore. He was John. He didn't remember her, who she was, the love they shared. All those years of suffering and uncertainty had culminated in a reality that Emily could never have imagined. I don't know," she replied, her voice failing. Suddenly her legs gave way, and she had to lean on a nearby chair to keep from falling. The nurse rushed over to hold her, clearly alarmed. "Sit down. I'll get someone to help you." Before Emily could protest, he had already left, calling for a doctor. Minutes later, Emily was in another room, being given medication to calm her anxiety. The doctor watched her intently, asking what had happened, but Emily couldn't explain. How could she? It all seemed like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. As the sedative took effect, Emily felt the tears silently streaming down her face. She didn't know what to do next. She wanted to run to Nathan and hold him. She wanted to shout at him for disappearing. She wanted to hug him and never let him go. But how could she confront someone who no longer knew who she was? She closed her eyes, trying to organize her thoughts. One thing was certain. The man she saw today, the one called John, was Nathan, and she needed to find out the full truth, even if it meant facing a whirlwind of emotions that she thought she had buried forever. Emily woke up feeling disoriented, as if she had emerged from a heavy dream. The room she was in was silent, except for the distant sound of footsteps and voices in the corridor. It took her mind a few seconds to remember why she was there. The weight of reality fell on her like an avalanche. Nathan or John was there in the same hospital, and he didn't remember a thing. She stood up slowly, her body still feeling weak from the sedative. The emotions of the day before came back full force, and Emily knew she needed answers. She needed to understand how the person she loved had become a stranger. Determined, she left the room and started looking for the nurse who had told her about John. After a few minutes wandering around the hospital, she found him in one of the corridors organizing medical records. He looked up and, seeing her, walked towards her. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, with a gentle tone. Emily nodded, although she knew that better was a word far removed from her reality. "Can I talk to you?" The nurse indicated an empty room nearby where they could talk more privately. Emily went in, sat down in a chair, and took a deep breath before starting. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low but charged with emotion. "I know Nathan." The nurse frowned, surprised, but said nothing. He just waited for Emily to continue. "His name is Nathan. He was my fiancé. We were about to get married a few years ago, but he disappeared on our wedding day." Emily paused, struggling to keep her composure as she relived the pain. "I spent months looking for him. I went to police stations, hospitals, shelters. I did everything I could to find him, but it was as if he had evaporated." Tears began to stream down Emily's face as she continued. "I never understood what happened. I never knew why he left me. And now to find out that he was here all along, I don't know how to deal with it." The nurse, visibly touched by the story, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry for what you've been through. It explains so much." He always had an emptiness in his eyes, as if something important was missing. Emily wiped away her tears, trying to pull herself together. "I need to see him. I need to talk to him, even if he doesn't remember me." The nurse hesitated for a moment, but, seeing the determination on Emily's face, agreed. "All right then, I'll take you to him." They walked together through the silent corridors of the hospital. Every step made Emily's heart beat faster, a mixture of anxiety and fear. When they reached the room where Nathan was, Emily stopped at the door, taking a deep breath before entering. Nathan was sitting in his wheelchair, looking out of the window at the garden. The sunlight illuminated his face, highlighting the lines of tiredness and suffering that had taken the place of the vibrant man Emily had known. He seemed calm, but also distant, as if he were in a world of his own. Emily took a few hesitant steps, stopping a few meters away from him. "Nathan..." He didn't react to the name. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers, but without any sign of recognition. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and calm. The question hit Emily like a knife. She felt her legs go weak but forced herself to continue. "It's me, Emily." Nathan frowned, trying to understand, but his expression remained blank. "I'm sorry. I don't know who you are." His words destroyed Emily. Everything she had carried for years, the pain, the anger, the love, burst into tears that she couldn't hold back. She fell to her knees beside him, holding his hand carefully. "I looked for you for so long. I never gave up on you. Don't you remember? Don't you remember anything?" Nathan looked at her, confused. "I'm sorry, I don't remember anything." Emily sobbed, her head falling into his hands. The moment was overwhelming, but at the same time, she felt a desperate need to be close to him. Can I hold you?" she asked, her voice barely coming out. Nathan hesitated, but finally nodded. "Of course." Emily leaned over and wrapped her arms around him. holding him with all the love and pain she had accumulated over the years. He remained motionless, allowing the embrace, but not reciprocating. His eyes were fixed on a distant point, while Emily wept silently. The sound of her sobs filled the room, and outside, some of the hospital staff stopped to watch. Many had known John for years and were visibly moved to hear Emily's story. For them, John was like family. Seeing him now involved in such a complex and painful plot was like watching the end of a real soap opera. After a while, Emily pulled away, wiping her tears. She looked at Nathan, still holding his hands. "I'm going to help you remember. Somehow, I'll bring you back." Nathan didn't answer. He just watched her with the same confused expression. Later, Emily went to a corner of the hospital and did something she hadn't done for years. She picked up the phone and called Nathan's parents. When she answered, his mother's voice was filled with surprise and hope. "Emily, is that you? What happened?" Emily took a deep breath before answering. "I found Nathan." There was a silence on the other end of the line before his mother began to cry. Emily explained everything she had found out, and in a matter of hours, the news had spread among Nathan's friends and family. Everyone promised to go to the hospital the next day, eager to see the man they believed was lost forever. Emily knew that the next day would be difficult, but she also knew that she was not alone. She had found Nathan, and although he didn't remember her, she was determined not to let him disappear from her life again. The next day, the rehabilitation room was full of people. Nathan's parents, friends, and old acquaintances. Everyone came hoping to rekindle some spark of memory in him, but the expression on Nathan's face remained the same, confused, oblivious. The reunion was as emotional as it was devastating. Everyone was crying, sharing stories, and showing old photos in an attempt to bring Nathan back. But no matter how hard they tried, he just shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't connect those memories to the man he was now. The hospital waiting room was filled with an atmosphere of tension and hope. After the devastating reunion, Nathan's parents, Elizabeth and Henry, wasted no time in taking action. Both were determined to do everything possible to help their son get his life back, even if the road was long and uncertain. Elizabeth, her eyes red from crying, held the phone tightly as she made frantic calls. Henry, next to her, was leafing through documents and research Emily had found on clinics specializing in rehabilitation and neurological treatments. "Yes, doctor, I understand. But we need the best," Elizabeth insisted, her voice trembling. "No, money isn't the problem. It's my son, please help us." Emily watched everything from a nearby chair, still processing the events of the last few days. Despite feeling emotionally drained, she couldn't look away from Nathan, who remained seated in his wheelchair, oblivious to the commotion around him. He was staring into nothingness, as if trying to escape from a reality that made no sense to him. Emily knew she needed to act too. Her mind, normally so focused and organized, was in chaos. The event she was supposed to decorate for at the hospital seemed like a distant and insignificant problem now. She picked up the phone with trembling fingers and called Amanda, one of her closest friends and work colleagues. "Amanda, I need you," Emily said bluntly. "Emily, what happened? Are you all right?" Amanda asked, clearly worried. "I'm not okay, and I can't explain everything right now. I need you to come over here and complete the event for me. I can't think of anything else." "Of course, I'm on my way," Amanda replied without hesitation. "Send me the details and leave it to me." After hanging up, Emily took a deep breath, trying to focus again. She knew that confiding in Amanda was the best decision, as she couldn't devote herself to her work at the moment. Her priority now was Nathan. The next morning, Elizabeth received a call from one of New York's most renowned doctors, who specialized in cases like Nathan's. The news brought a ray of hope to her. The news brought a ray of hope to the family, and preparations for the transfer began immediately. Henry took care of all the logistics, while Emily helped organize Nathan's belongings and make sure he was as comfortable as possible. The journey to New York was long and emotionally draining. Emily sat next to Nathan the whole way, holding his hand as if this could create some kind of lost connection. But Nathan, although receptive to the gesture, still showed no recognition. Arriving at the specialist hospital was a relief for everyone. The building was imposing, with state-of-the-art equipment and highly qualified staff. The doctor in charge, Dr. Carter, welcomed the family with kindness and professionalism. "Nathan's case is challenging but not impossible," the doctor explained after a series of initial examinations. We'll start with physical rehabilitation to help him regain his mobility. As for his memory, it's a more delicate process. We can't promise anything, but we'll do our best. The weeks that followed were a real test of patience and determination. Nathan's physical rehabilitation began almost immediately, and every day was a struggle. He spent hours in physiotherapy sessions, trying to regain strength and control over his movements. Emily was present at almost every session, watching his progress with tears in her eyes. At first, Nathan could barely stand with the help of the physiotherapists. But little by little, he began to take his first steps. There were moments of pain and effort, but also of silent triumph. "Well done, Nathan, you're doing great," encouraged the physiotherapist as he took another hesitant step. Nathan looked at his own feet, as if the simple act of walking was something extraordinary. For him, it was. Despite the physical advances, Nathan's memory remained an enigma. He spent hours in sessions with neuropsychologists and specialized therapists, but no memories seemed to emerge. Emily tried to help by showing him old photos and telling him stories about their past, but each attempt ended in frustration. "I'm sorry," Nathan said with a guilty expression. "I wanted to remember, but I can't." These words broke Emily's heart every time. She saw Nathan's effort, his desire to understand what he had lost, but she also saw the invisible barrier that prevented him from accessing those memories. One evening, while Emily was sitting next to Nathan in the hospital room, he looked at her curiously. "You don't have to stay here all the time, you know," he said with a slight smile. Emily smiled back, even though her heart ached. "I want to be here." Nathan seemed about to say something, but kept quiet. Emily realized that he was still struggling to understand why someone he didn't recognize devoted so much time and effort to him. With each passing day, Emily felt she was getting closer to Nathan, but she also felt the weight of a cruel uncertainty. What if he never remembered? What if the man she loved had disappeared forever, leaving only the shell of who he used to be? Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Henry continued tirelessly in their search for specialists and treatments that could help. The family's dedication and Emily's support were the anchors that kept Nathan steady amidst the chaos of his lost mind. The day Nathan was discharged was a mixture of joy and melancholy. He had overcome physical barriers that had seemed impossible months ago. His steps were firm, if a little cautious, and his physical strength almost completely restored. But the most painful barrier remained intact: his memory. Emily helped pack her things at the hospital, while Elizabeth and Henry worked out the last details with the doctors. The medical team reinforced the importance of continuing the rehabilitation exercises at home and recommended that Nathan be exposed to familiar places and meaningful objects, something that could help stimulate memories. Emily listened attentively. Her heart was torn between happiness that Nathan was coming home and the pain of knowing that he still didn't remember her. The journey back was silent. Nathan seemed absorbed in his own thoughts, staring out of the car window as if trying to decipher a world that still seemed strange to him. Emily, sitting next to him, felt the weight of the distance between them, even though they were so close. Nathan's parents' house was cozy, full of memories of the past. Old photographs decorated the walls, and every corner seemed to carry a piece of history that he had forgotten. Elizabeth made a point of showing him the family albums as soon as they arrived, pointing to photos and telling stories. "Here you are on your 10th birthday. That's the day you got your first bike," she said, holding up a photo of a smiling Nathan with his hands full of cake. Nathan looked at the pictures curiously, but his expression remained vacant. "Sounds like a good memory," he commented, trying to be positive. Emily watched from afar, with a tightness in her chest. It was hard to see Nathan struggling to connect with something that should be natural. Over the next few days, Emily decided that she needed to do more. If the memories didn't come back naturally, perhaps she could guide him to them. She started taking Nathan to places that had been important to them in the past, in the hope of rekindling some spark. The first place was the park where they used to walk together on Sunday mornings. This was where they had had their first serious conversation about marriage, sitting on a wooden bench under the shade of a large tree. When they arrived, Nathan looked around, admiring his surroundings. "It's beautiful here," he commented, with a slight smile. Emily sat down on the bench next to him, waiting for something to happen. "This place was special to us," she said carefully. Nathan turned his face towards her, his eyes narrowed in confusion. How special? Emily hesitated. It was painful to explain something so intimate to someone who couldn't remember who she was. This is where we talked about the future, about what we wanted to build together, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathan looked at the floor, as if trying to grasp some lost memory. Finally, he shook his head. I'm sorry, I can't remember. His words were like knives cutting through her heart, but Emily just nodded. It's all right. Let's not force anything, she said, forcing a smile. Over the next few days, she took him to other places. The coffee shop where they used to have coffee together, the bookstore where he had bought her first present, and even the small inn where they had spent a romantic weekend years ago. But in all these places, Nathan's reaction was the same. Curiosity, but no connection. I know this is important to you, Emily, Nathan said after one of these visits, but I don't want you to suffer because of me. She looked at him, her eyes full of tears. You don't understand, it's not for me. It's for us. Nathan looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Emily knew he wasn't saying it out of spite, but because he really didn't know what else to do. One evening, while Emily was going through some old photos alone in the guest room, Elizabeth quietly entered the room. Are you all right, dear? Elizabeth asked, taking a seat next to her. Emily sighed, holding up a photo of Nathan and her on their engagement day. I don't know what to do anymore, Elizabeth. It seems that the more I try, the more distant he gets. Elizabeth held her hand firmly. You're doing more than anyone could have expected, and even if he doesn't remember now, I'm sure he feels how much you care. Elizabeth's words were comforting, but Emily knew that nothing could fill the void left by Nathan's lack of recognition. The next day, Emily decided to take Nathan to the most symbolic place of all, the church where they should have been married. She hesitated before suggesting the idea, but felt she had to try. When they arrived, Nathan was silent for a long time, staring at the empty altar. It's beautiful here, he finally said. Emily felt the tears threaten to fall again. She looked at him, wishing that something would change. But Nathan remained oblivious, as if this place was just another in a long list of attempts. After a few minutes, he turned to her. Emily, I feel like I'm letting you down. She shook her head quickly. No, you're not. Nathan sighed, clearly frustrated with himself. I want to remember. I want to remember you, everything we had. But it's like there's a wall in my mind, and I can't get through it. Emily swallowed, trying to hold back the tears. We'll keep trying. Together. As they left the church, Emily realized that despite all the difficulties, she couldn't give up. Nathan was still there somehow, and as long as there was hope, she would keep fighting. Nathan had been trying to stay patient and focused, but every time Emily took him to a new place or showed him a new photo, he felt as if he was failing her. He admired Emily's determination, her dedication to helping him recover what seemed lost forever. But at the same time, there was a growing pressure that he didn't know how to deal with. Every attempt to jog his memory was like hitting an insurmountable wall. One silent afternoon, as the two of them walked through the garden of his parents' house, Nathan finally found the words he needed to say. He knew it would be painful, but he also knew it was necessary. Emily, can we talk? He asked, his voice soft but full of seriousness. Emily stopped and looked at him, her eyes immediately searching for some hint of what was to come. Sure, what's it about? Nathan took a deep breath, trying to gather his courage. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done, for being there for me, for showing me these places, for trying to help me. Emily smiled, but there was a shadow of concern on her face. I just want you to remember, Nathan. I want you to go back to who you were. Nathan lowered his eyes, feeling a tightness in his chest. I know that, and that's what worries me. She frowned. What do you mean? He looked at her again, his eyes full of sincerity. I feel like I'm letting you down. Every time you take me somewhere or try to tell me a story, I see the hope in your eyes, and then I see how you look when I can't remember. It hurts me, Emily. It hurts because I don't want to hurt you, but it also hurts because I feel like I'm failing to be who you need me to be. Emily shook her head quickly, tears already threatening to fall. No, Nathan, you're not letting me down. He interrupted her gently, taking her hands. I know you say that, but I feel it. I enjoy your company, Emily. I really do. But I feel pressured, like every moment is a test I have to pass. And for me, that doesn't work. Emily tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She knew he wasn't wrong. Nathan continued, his voice low and cautious. I think I need some time to process things in my own way, to try to understand who I am now, without this pressure. Emily felt as if the ground was opening up under her feet. She knew he wasn't saying it to hurt her, but the words were still devastating. She nodded slowly, not trusting her own voice to respond. It's okay, Nathan. I understand. Nathan gently squeezed her hands before releasing them. Thank you, Emily. I hope you know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. She forced a smile and walked away, saying she had to go. When she got home, Emily collapsed. All the memories she had tried to repress over the years came back in full force. The image of herself, alone at the altar, waiting for a groom who never showed up, came back to haunt her. The humiliation, pain, and uncertainty that had marked that day seemed more vivid than ever. Emily began to isolate herself. She barely left her room and didn't answer any calls from friends or family. The food remained untouched on the table, and the curtains remained closed, plunging the room into a constant gloom. Her parents, always present and worried, tried everything they could to reach her. Emily, you have to react, said her mother one evening, gently holding her daughter's face. You can't go on like this. I just want to be alone, Mom, Emily replied, her voice empty. The days turned into weeks, and the concern of everyone around Emily grew, until, one particularly quiet morning, Elizabeth, Nathan's mother, received a call from one of Emily's parents' friends who explained the situation. Emily is not well, Elizabeth. She needs help. Elizabeth felt a squeeze in her heart when she heard this. She knew that Emily was struggling, but she hadn't imagined that the situation had come to this. After a long conversation with Henry, Elizabeth decided to talk to Nathan. Nathan, I need to ask you something important, she said, entering the room where he was reading. Nathan looked at her worriedly. What is it? Elizabeth took a deep breath. It's about Emily. She's not well, my son. Nathan's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Ever since you decided to take a break, she's been isolating herself. She's not eating, she's not leaving the house. I know you asked for space, but I think she needs you now. Nathan remained silent, processing his mother's words. He loved Emily, even without the memories that should accompany this feeling, and the idea that she was suffering because of him made him uneasy. I'm going to see her, he finally said with determination. When Nathan arrived at Emily's house, he felt a strange familiarity. Something in the atmosphere made him pause for a moment before knocking on the door. It was the smell, a mixture of flowers and something softer, like vanilla. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling an inexplicable emotion rise in his chest. When the door opened, Emily's parents greeted him with expressions of relief. She's in her room, said her father, leading him down the corridor. Nathan entered slowly. Emily was sitting on the bed, her gaze lost in the window. When she realized he was there, her eyes filled with tears. Nathan. He came over and sat down next to her. Something inside him seemed to stir, like a flame that had been extinguished long ago. Emily, he began but stopped, feeling the weight of the moment. I had to come. Emily smiled weakly, tears streaming down her face. Even though he still didn't remember her, his presence was all she needed at that moment. As they talked, Nathan couldn't get rid of that lingering feeling. It was as if something was trying to emerge from the depths of his mind. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was important. The afternoon was grey, and the silence that filled Emily's room seemed a perfect reflection of the state of her soul. Nathan was sitting next to her, observing every detail of her expression. He didn't know why, but something about being there with her made him feel a melancholy he couldn't explain. It was as if a part of him knew he should protect her, take care of her, but the exact connection was still out of reach. Emily, on the other hand, felt like she was on the edge of an emotional precipice. Nathan's presence brought a mixture of comfort and pain, reminding her of everything she had lost and everything she could still lose. She knew she couldn't go on like this, living in the shadow of the past. She needed to tell him everything she felt, even if it meant opening wounds that had never fully healed. Nathan, she began, her voice low, almost a whisper. He turned to her, attentive. I need to show you something. Something I've kept for a long time. Nathan nodded, not knowing exactly what to expect. Emily slowly stood up and walked over to a drawer in her desk. From it, she took out a folded piece of paper, yellowed by time. She held it carefully as if it were something precious and returned to where he was sitting. "These are the vows I wrote for you," she said, taking a seat next to him. "I wrote them with all my heart, thinking about the future we imagined together. I never had the chance to read them to you." Nathan frowned, puzzled. He saw the way her hands trembled as she held the paper, as if this moment was as important as the wedding day itself, which never happened. Emily took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that were already threatening to flow, and began to read. "Nathan, when I think of the future, all I see is you. You are the reason I believe in love, in kindness, and in the strength to face any challenge. I promise to be by your side in every moment, whether it's filled with happiness or difficulty. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your greatest supporter. I promise to love you with everything I am, today and every day of my life." Emily's voice began to falter, but she continued. "When I look at you, I see a man who gives me the courage to dream, who makes me want to be the best version of myself. And today, in front of everyone we love, I want you to know that you are my home, my beginning and my end. I love you, Nathan, and I always will." When Emily had finished, the tears flowed freely down her face. She looked at Nathan, expecting some kind of reaction, but he remained silent. His face was still, but his eyes were filled with something she couldn't decipher. Suddenly he put his hand on his chest, as if he was feeling intense pain. His eyes closed for a moment, and Emily quickly approached, concerned. "Nathan, are you all right?" He raised his hand, asking her to wait. Then he slowly opened his eyes again. Something had changed. "Emily," he whispered, his voice broken. She froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. I remember," he said, tears starting to run down his face. "I remember everything." The world seemed to stop for Emily. She stared at him in disbelief as her heart raced. "Do you remember?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nathan nodded, holding her hands tightly. "I remember the day we met, the first time I saw you smile. I remember how I planned that marriage proposal for weeks, and how you laughed at me because I was so nervous. I remember everything, Emily, all of it." The tears now came from both of them, and Emily hugged him so tightly that it seemed she would never let go. Nathan returned the embrace, holding her as if she were his anchor in a sea of emotions. "I'm sorry for everything you've been through, for all the suffering I've caused," he said, his voice muffled by tears. "If I could change it, I would." "You came back to me, Nathan, that's all that matters," Emily replied, still not believing that this moment was real. When they finally parted, Nathan looked her in the eye, and she saw something she hadn't seen for years, the unconditional love she had always believed he felt for her. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly among family and friends. Everyone was thrilled with Nathan's recovery and the couple's reunion. They decided to renew their vows, this time uninterrupted, in an intimate ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most to them. On their wedding day, Nathan was standing at the altar, waiting for Emily with a smile that seemed to light up the whole world. When she entered, dressed in white, his eyes filled with tears again. This time, he knew that nothing would keep them apart. When Emily finally reached the altar, the emotion on Nathan's face was evident. He held her hands gently, as if he were touching something precious, something he had feared he would lose forever. The guests could hardly hold back their tears as they watched the scene. It was impossible not to feel the intensity of the love that overflowed between the two. Nathan took a deep breath, trying to contain his own emotion. He looked at Emily with a shaky smile, his eyes shining. "Emily, before we continue, there is something I need to say." She stared at him in surprise, but nodded, letting him continue. Nathan pulled a small, carefully folded piece of paper from his pocket and opened it. He looked at her again, and his voice sounded firm but charged with emotion. "When you read your vows to me that day, something awoke inside me. It was as if everything that had been lost had finally found its way back. And ever since, I've been thinking about what I would say to you." He paused, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall, and continued. "Emily, you were the light that guided my path when everything around me was darkness. Even when I couldn't remember who I was, you were there, showing me that I still had a place in this world, that I was still loved." Nathan's voice began to break, but he continued, determined. "I don't know how you did it, how you endured all the pain, how you found the strength to keep trying. But today, looking at you, all I can feel is gratitude. For never giving up on me. For believing that somehow I would come back to you. Emily could no longer hold back her tears, and neither could the guests around her. Nathan's every word was like a cure for all the wounds of the past. I promise you, Emily, that I will never let you feel alone again. I promise to be by your side every step of the way, in every moment, be it happy or difficult. I promise to love you with everything I am, today and forever. Nathan closed the paper, but continued to look into her eyes. And above all, I promise to repay you for every moment of love you have given me. You didn't just save my life, Emily. You saved my soul. The two were now surrounded by a deep silence, the kind of silence that only exists in moments of pure connection. Nathan held Emily's face, wiping away a tear that ran down her cheek. The celebrant, with an emotional voice, led the rest of the ceremony. Nathan Carter, do you take Emily Johnson to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and respect her all the days of your life? I do, Nathan answered without hesitation, his gaze never leaving hers. And do you, Emily Johnson, take Nathan Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and respect him all the days of your life? Emily smiled, tears still falling, and answered with all the strength in her heart, I do. Then I pronounce you man and wife. Nathan and Emily kissed under the applause and tears of those present, a kiss that was not just a promise of love, but the celebration of a journey that had tested them to the limit. In that moment, all that was pain and suffering disappeared, leaving only the love that had united them from the beginning. That day they didn't just celebrate a wedding, they celebrated life, love, and the strength of two souls who, despite all the adversities, found their way back to each other. This is proof that love, when nurtured by patience, forgiveness, and dedication, can transform even the darkest moments into an ending full of light and hope. If you were moved by their journey, leave a like to support our work and help share this story with more people. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next exciting stories we have for you. Now click on the video that appears on the screen to watch another unforgettable narrative that will touch your heart. See you in the next video.